dealt with Stephanie, you know that you say yes quickly so that you don't have to put up with all the agonizing discussion. But thank you, Stephanie. And I am very proud to step up to be the business champion for early learning in Atlanta. President Stephanie made a huge impression on me several years ago when she presented this topic to our club. Some of you may remember the day that Stephanie showed up with 2 jars of M&Ms, one filled to the brim, representing the number of words a child of 3 or 4 has in his head when they have been read to, when they have been talked to, when they've been nurtured, like I did with mine and like I'm sure many of you did with yours. The other jar only had a few inches of M&Ms in it, representing the depravity of words in a child's brain when they don't get proper attention from birth to 3. I didn't think so much about this when my own kids were young. We were talking about it at the table, but now that I have a 2-year-old grandson, I really appreciate the importance of the first 3 years of life. We have just got to do more in our community to help. Stephanie has assigned a lot of reading material to me about early brain development. Really enjoying that. It's a lot of these things I listen to, and believe it or not, I almost fall asleep on my walks listening to some of this stuff, but it's very interesting. I have learned that the benefits of building a strong foundation for young children in their first 3 years of life, and I really have learned a lot about this, and no kidding aside, it clearly takes a community to get this to work. Parents and families cannot do this by themselves. Here are a few things to consider. Businesses benefit from implementing family-friendly policies and supporting child care infrastructure. At my company, we're hoping some of these strategies can help address the Great Resignation. Companies that offer child care assistance see employee absences decrease by up to 30% and turnover decline by as much as 60%. We all know turnover costs are high, and this could be a real cost savings for our businesses. Working parents, and women in particular, are exiting the labor force in record numbers. Listen to this. From February 2020 to February 2021, 2.3 million women across the country left the labor force, leaving women's labor force participation rate at the lowest percentage since 1988. If these families had access to affordable, quality child care, the parents could continue working, which helps to ensure an economic security for their families. But there's a huge gap in affordable, quality child care. According to a recent analysis by the Reinvestment Fund in a partnership with Gears, there is a significant gap between the supply and the demand for child care in the city of Atlanta. There is an estimated demand of almost 50,000 children and only 24,731 licensed child seats exist in the city of Atlanta. Now you take the number of quality seats is even lower at just under 13,000. That makes the gap more like 36 or 37,000 seats. And the affordability of many of those seats is simply out of reach for our fellow citizens. Clearly, it's time to address this issue. We've got to come together and improve child quality, make child care more affordable, and address challenges. The future of so many of our kids in our city depends on it. I like to think of the analogy of packing your suitcase for a long journey. You know, it's laying on the bed, it's wide open, and you start to put lots of stuff in your bag. But as the trip gets closer, the bag must be closed and sealed up and zipped up and fastens to take your trip. Well, that's like the brain of a child, of a newborn. It's wide open to start. But as the child ages from 0 to 3, the brain is developing. Packing the brain at an early age assures a child will have all the stuff he or she needs for a long journey on earth, maybe 80 or 90 years. Leaving it empty at those developing years makes for a very long and difficult journey. Stephanie mentioned that she and I had a meeting with Mayor Dickens last week. He spoke passionately about his vision that Atlanta set an example for the nation in how we address early learning. We discussed the need for public-private partnerships. That's us in this room partnering with those that can help us. And I'm more optimistic than ever that the great progress we can make together. So now it's my pleasure to introduce fellow Rotarian Randall Kirsch, who is going to introduce the panel and moderate as well. Randall?
Hey guys, and welcome. Randall Kirsch. I'm just thrilled that we're going to be talking about this topic today. I'm a father of three. I first intersected, though, with the idea of early care and learning as something that could have meaningful downstream impacts on much more than just education, was when I did Leadership Atlanta over a decade ago. And if you've been through Leadership Atlanta, you know it goes something like this. You go to a health day, and you find out that people are really unhealthy in general, and some communities are especially unhealthy, and there's a lot of disparities in how healthcare is delivered. It's a pretty depressing picture. And then you go to Criminal Justice Day, and you learn about how a kid who intersects with the criminal justice system may never recover, and all the things that happen after that. And on this goes in the program, and it's overwhelming. It really is. It's totally overwhelming, and you're thinking, how could we ever make a dent in all of these things that seem interconnected to each other? But then on Education Day, which in the year I was doing Leadership Atlanta, we went really deep on early childhood education. We learned things like this. High-quality early childhood education has been shown to improve graduation rates, lifetime earnings, health outcomes across communities while reducing drug abuse, teen pregnancy, and incarceration rates. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? So now I'm thinking, wait a second, there might be a silver bullet hiding in all this mess that we're seeing. The reason we're here today is because something in April happened that was pretty remarkable, because many of you in the room have been working on this issue for a long, long time, and so for that we all thank you. But it's not always registering on the overall public consciousness like it should, but in April, Mayor Andre Dickens announced a historic, really first time ever, $20 million investment in early childhood education to give Atlanta's youngest citizens the strong start they need by now, you know, not just in education, not just in school, but in life. So he's pledged $5 million from the city, another $5 million from APS, and has called on the private sector to contribute another $10 million, which brings us to today's panel. And we are joined by two distinguished panelists I want to introduce. I'll start with Courtney English. Many of you know Courtney. Courtney's a senior policy advisor to the mayor. He's also an Atlanta native. He's also a fellow APS kid, Douglas High School. There you go. I was APS K through 12, so I'm right there with you. He was the youngest person to hold citywide office in the city's history, first elected to the Atlanta Board of Education at age 24. And if I have your bio right, you were a middle school teacher. Scandal hits APS, and you decide, wait a second, there's a better way for me to get involved and help here. So he gets elected to the school board. 4 years later, age 28, he's elected unanimously as Board of Education chair by his peers. Youngest ever to be that position. You guys are starting to see a pattern. And while he was in that role, he raised teacher pay, increased classroom spending, increased the graduation rate from 51% to 79%. I don't think you can overstate that alone. Is incredible. And sent a record number of students to college. Later, went on to work as director of community development for Star C, capital C, a nonprofit affordable housing developer, where he helped create and refurbish thousands of affordable housing units throughout Metro Atlanta. So Courtney's got his hands in two of the most important issues our city could possibly be grappling with right now, education and affordable housing. So thank you for that. And in that role, he raised $11 million to help more than 4,000 residents stave off eviction, expanded access to affordable housing, reduced tenant transiency, on and on it goes. So today, working for the mayor, his policy portfolio includes some of Atlanta's most pressing public challenges, which by now is like his jam. That's what he likes. Affordable housing, economic development, youth engagement, and closing Atlanta's long-standing equity gaps, which is a part of what we're talking about today. Morehouse manned and has a master's from Columbia University. That's Courtney. And Courtney, if you want to come on up and take a seat here. For powerhouse number two, Blythe Robinson is with us today. She's the president and CEO of Sheltering Arms Early Education and Family Centers. If you grew up in Atlanta or have been here a long time, you've heard of Sheltering Arms. I'd heard of Sheltering Arms my whole life. I didn't really know a whole lot about them I'm embarrassed to say. But Blythe is the president of CEO. It was founded in 1888, which I thought was a misprint, but it's not. Serving nearly 2,500 children daily, ages 6 weeks, so the teeny ones, to 5 years old, in 13 early care and learning centers across the metro, 4 of which I learned from Blythe are in the city of Atlanta proper. And she's helped them increase their national visibility and got them on the radar of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, part of that initiative, and part of Ascend at the Aspen Institute. Prior to joining Sheltering Arms, Robinson served as the Senior Vice President and Chief Programs Officer of the Early Learning Coalition of Miami-Dade, Monroe, Florida. So doing basically the similar things in South Florida. And you were working with 50,000 children annually through that program. And Robinson has been recognized for her work many times, 40 under 40, and on it goes. So with that, I'll stop and bring Blythe up here. We'll get into the conversation. Great. Thank you guys again for being here. Courtney, I'm going to start with you and then move to Blythe on this. And one thing that's great is we've got somebody who's thinking sort of policy, city of Atlanta level. We've got somebody who's in the trenches seeing this stuff happen in the real world every day. So it's exciting to have them together. So Courtney, the mayor committed $20 million in funding. In fact, it was the biggest commitment that was made in terms of investments that were talked about that day at the State of the City address. And in part, he said he wants to make Atlanta the best place to raise a child. Now, there's lots of things the mayor could be focused on right now in Atlanta, lots of competing priorities. Why is early childhood education such an important priority for the mayor right now when it could be lots of other things?
Well, I appreciate that question, Randall. It's good to be with you. It's good to be with you, Stephanie, and Tommy, and so many friends. I feel like there are so many faces in this audience that we've been working on a variety of issues for a number of years. I got to say I'm a bit nervous not because of y'all, really because my wife's in the audience. And Randall read that long bio. You hear all that nice stuff he said about me? All right, just making sure. No, the long and short of it is early education is as close of a thing as you can find to a silver bullet. If you care about crime, you care about early education. If you care about attracting and retaining high quality employees for your companies, you care about early education. If you care about affordability, you care about early education. In this city alone, we are significantly rent burdened, right? But the part of the rent burden that we don't talk about is the fact that there are families throughout this city who spend almost 40% of their income on childcare. And so when you reduce that burden, you increase access to high quality early education options. It's good for business, it's good for public safety, it's good for economic development. It goes on and on and on. And so of course, when the mayor took office, this is going to be top of mind in order to build a city that works for everyone.
Yeah, understood, great. Blythe, tell me what you think from your position, why it's so important, not just in America, but in the city of Atlanta in particular. What do you see?
I mean, we've heard all of the information about early childhood education, and if you want a world-class city, you have to have high-quality early learning opportunities for its citizens, and we know that that's just not, we don't have enough of that, and so we know the brain development and the brain science, what's happening in those early years really, really, really matters for our children. And it's a both and, as we were talking about at the table. It's both and. It's about the child development piece and it's about a workforce piece. And we have to look at child care as both things, not either or. And I think for a while the conversation has been either or, and it's really about both and.
So let's talk about, Courtney, I'll go to you on the $20 million investment because that's a big number and half of it is coming from the private sector, right? And so you got a lot of the private sector in the room, so it's going to be important for us to really understand. So let's talk about where that money is going, why the priorities that are being funded with that money are the priorities. So just give us the sort of bird's eye view of where the $20 million is going and why.
Yeah, absolutely. So the mayor announced in partnership with Gears and PACT a $20 million commitment, which is really a down payment towards the ultimate goal of getting the universal early education in the city. That $20 million number is spread over 3 buckets. The first bucket is we want to put some money in the hands of our high quality teachers who've been working so hard throughout the pandemic, who do a ton to help our kids get a hand. And so the first part is just straight up stipends. We love on our teachers. I'm a fervent believer. We got to take care of the people who take care of us, and teachers are the tip of that iceberg. The second bucket is really around improving facilities. There are a number of facilities, particularly on the south side, who need a little more love and tender care, if you will. And so we're going to put some money in their hands to improve the quality of their services. And then the final bucket is straight up scholarship. So we're going to provide funding to parents who want to have access to high quality early childhood education. So part of that funding, though, is going to be part of the funding for the teacher piece, though, is really cool. I see Comer Yates in the audience, who's really it looks like he brought his entire team. If y'all can raise y'all hands real quick, that crew, that whole table, they are really the best in the world at what they do. And so part of the funding that we're going to provide instructors is going to be tied to an incentive that if they go to Cox campus at the speech school, where they've got the best training in the world, they're going to get an additional stipend. And so we're incredibly excited about that. And we're at $15 million raised, by the way. And so thanks to the Whitehead Foundation and United Way. And we're planning on closing that out at the end of the year.
So I want to start with maybe the least exciting sounding one, which is the physical facilities piece, right? Because some of these others are really exciting. We're going to talk about all those. But I want to talk about the physical environment of learning, which you don't hear as much about or hear money flowing into. Blythe, talk to us about what it's like to be in one of these early learning environments and why the physical facility is really important for these kids to be successful.
Well, I think the physical environment is exciting.
Okay. Good start.
I do. Because I really believe that, young children need beautiful spaces to learn, grow, and play and explore. And so they deserve to have very beautiful spaces that are also safe and healthy, right? Because we are often looking at the safety and healthy environment for our very young children. So I'm excited about that investment in this part of the early learning system, because I think it's so needed. We overlook it a lot. And when you visit some of the centers that our children are in and the homes, you see that there is a need for the playground to be improved so that our children can go outside, learn, run, play. That's how they're learning at the very young age, is through that play. And so that's just it's an exciting part of it to me.
I suspect a large majority of this room would go into some of those places and immediately realize why it needs investment.
Exactly.
And it's hard for us to see when we haven't been there. Courtney, talk to us about the specifics of how that program will work. How many schools are going to need renovation and refurbishment? How do you qualify? Give us a little bit of the specifics.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's more than we like, right? And so it's more money that this partnership dictates. The majority of these places, again, have gone without a lot of the funding that other places throughout the city has access to. And so we're looking to serve up to 200 or so centers throughout the city of Atlanta. We'll do a big before and after shot, so you all know where your funds went. There are going to be people standing up in the aisles in a second who are going to collect the rest of this $5 million. So you all should be.
See your usher.
So you all should be prepared. But and so there are a number of centers who need a lot of love. But overall, I think the piece I'll talk about is, with the overall $20 million commitment, we feel like we can touch anywhere between 2,000 and 3,000 kids. That's going to have an extraordinary impact I see Dr. Herring in the audience from APS on the work that they do inside of our school system. It's going to have an extraordinary impact for all of you in this city, and so we're excited about it.
It's incredibly exciting. Blythe, let's talk about the teachers. So we talked about where the children are learning and what that's like. Let's talk about from whom they are learning, immensely important. Workforce shortage, workforce retention issues. I think we've all experienced workforce retention issues. This is on overdrive and has been happening since long before the pandemic started to, acquaint us all with those kind of issues. But talk about what's really going on in the classroom or in a teacher's life that's going to keep her from keeping that job long term or wanting to keep that job long term.
Yeah, I've talked quite a bit about the teacher shortage issue is what a lot of people say, but it is a crisis. And we do need more early learning teachers in our classrooms. A big part of it is compensation. Teachers at the early learning level are not compensated in the way that teachers in our K-12 systems are, and that is a policy conversation that we need to continue to have and push with our friends at Gears and other organizations about professionalizing and the professionalism of our early learning teachers. We don't talk about daycare. We talk about high-quality early learning experiences that are happening with our children from birth to 5, and these are professional teachers that should be compensated in that way. And so anything that we can do to support, acknowledge our teachers, we want to do that. And so we're really excited about these stipends as a way to acknowledge all of the hard work that they've been putting in, all the hours that they've been putting in before the pandemic, throughout the pandemic. If you remember, lots of early learning centers weren't closed. We were open. Our teachers were the frontline workers, and so they just need to be respected and treated as such.
It's so interesting to me, interesting not in a good way, that our society values education so much, but we don't like paying teachers. It's just a weird tension that's always been in that system. And then we're talking about today early education being perhaps the most leveraged investment of all, way upstream with lots of positive downstream implications, and we're going to pay them even less. It makes no sense. Courtney, talk about your point of view on teacher compensation and just keeping them in the classroom in general.
Well, I'm going to zoom out real quick, and I'll tell you a short story. I call it the babies in the river analogy. A farmer is next to a village. He looks out and sees a baby in a river. He jumps in the river like any of you all would do and pulls the baby out. And then 5 minutes later, he sees another baby in the river. He jumps in and he saves that baby. And then these babies keep floating down the river over and over and over and again. And pretty soon, he's called for help because there's so many babies in the river. And now the village has got to really lean in to get all of these babies out of the river, if you will. And then a wise man walks by and says, hey, does anybody want to go upstream and figure out why all these babies are ending up in this river, right? And that's what really early childhood education is. It's as simple as that. By the time Dr. Herring gets a kid in the Atlanta public school system, 80% of their brain is already developed, right? So by the time you're 6 years old, and you show up in APS, 80% of your wiring is already baked in. And so when we think about what that means for how we point and direct our investment, an ounce of prevention is going to be far cheaper and far better than a pound of cure any day. And so we've got to go upstream, invest in our young people at that early age, and put them on the right track to be successful.
Thank you for that. So we've talked about the learning environment and the teacher issue, and I think we'll get a Q&A in just a minute, guys, where we can talk more about that, I suspect. But let's talk about the third piece, and you alluded to it earlier, but affordability. I mean, you think about 40% of your income going to childcare, and much less what the housing probably is costing you, like sort of what's left to live on. Talk about how the mayor's plan is going to specifically address affordability.
Yeah, so this is an expensive proposition, right? It is one of the most expensive things that you can do, period, from a public policy perspective. It's probably the most expensive thing you can do from an educational perspective. To get to universal, I don't want to scare anybody, but, again, these folks are going to come around with some trays and ask for some money. It's almost a $60 million annual proposition to get to universal early ed. And that reason is you're essentially building 3 to 4 additional grade levels, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you begin to think about it that way, it begins to put it in context. And so, we talked about the housing affordability conversation. There's a significant portion of the population in the city that spends over 50% of their income on housing. You take that and you compound it with there's a significant portion of this population that spends almost 40% of their income on childcare. That's 90% of your income gone before you've bought food, before you've moved around the city, so on and so forth. And so these scholarships are going to be going to help reduce that cost. It's incredibly important.
And how does one become eligible for a scholarship? I want it for my kid. How does that work?
Got to call the mayor. I'll be giving out his phone number in a second.
Cell phone?
Well, speaking of the mayor, we're going to take a brief pause because we do have to keep the mayor on schedule. And he is going to issue the charge for the business community, for those of you who are in this room. So I'm going to invite Mayor Andre Dickens up at this time. So please join me in welcoming the mayor.
Thank you all. Wow. Good afternoon. Are we afternoon yet? Yeah, we're right at it. Good afternoon. Sorry to disrupt what y'all have going on here, Courtney and Blythe and Randall, but I wanted to stop by. I just got out of a wetsuit in a cage at the Georgia Aquarium. And Courtney saw most of it. He saw me go in there, and he was, we were just hoping that the sharks didn't say their grace before this meal that they were about to have. But I wanted to come by here because I understood that I knew that Courtney and Blythe were going to be on this panel talking about something that's near and dear to me and very important to you, very important to Gears, very important to all of my team members, Janine and so many others as we talk about this. And of course, Dr. Herron, we're talking about early childhood education. You've heard that before, but we're making it very real and very specific about why we're making this ask. If I get a show of hands, how many of you plan to have your businesses here 8 years from now? All right, good. That's good. Now, if you didn't raise your hand, let's talk to Invest Atlanta and some other people about getting you some packages to stay. But if you're planning on being here 8 years from now, then what happens today that prepares for 8-year-olds and their third grade reading scores matter? So if you're planning on being in business, you plan on being around, you plan on living in this city, we have to start thinking 8 years down the line. And it's not just 8 years because some political, tenure takes place, but it's 8 years down the line because third grade reading scores are that vital towards success, towards graduation, towards the prison pipeline, etc. And so I'm asking everyone to, yes, continue to call me about potholes. Potholes get filled in 5 days. That's a 5-day proposition. When you make a phone call, you should expect something to change within a week. We can handle week-to-week business. If you say something is going wrong on a street corner, you say that your garbage wasn't picked up or it was picked up, that is week by week. And so as an operator of this city, I have to make week-by-week decisions. I have to take care of the weekly business, the monthly business. We have statistics. As of yesterday, we just got 1% down in homicides for this year compared year over year. And now all that work that we've been doing with nightlife, with youth, the summer employment, with Police Athletic League, with the At Promise Centers, with Atlanta Police Foundation, all these things are starting to catch hold and work. But those are month by month. Those are quarterly objectives. Those are even by the end of the year. We'll have 10,000 street lights. We'll have this many potholes filled. But what we cannot do is operate only in the week by week, the 5-day cycle. That's not how you run your business. That's not how you go to your shareholders, your board members. How we go about our future is we look out at where the critical success factors are. And the critical success factor for education, for these outcomes, is over the next 8 years. So for a child born today, if we care about that child like we do, if a baby was in this room, we would just love on them and have all this care, but we have to carry that out all the way to what happens to them at year 8. And what happens at infancy matters. And so these first 3 critical years of early childhood education, because I plan to be here. I plan to be here as a citizen. I hope I plan to be here in a political capacity as your mayor. And so if I plan on being here, the things that we're going to solve problems for, those potholes and that issue, things that happen on the summer, making sure summer crime is down, I'll do that. But what we can't do just as standing at 55 Trinity by ourselves is solve the early childhood education problem. I can't make sure that we have quality child care without you. We can't make sure that these teachers, these paraprofessionals are paid without you. We can't make sure that individuals have scholarships that are already living month to month. They got more month than money a lot of times, these parents. And to be able to make sure that they can pay for quality child care. And so to be able to do that, I need you. I'll fill a pothole. I won't call you to help me fill a pothole, But what I will come stand here at the Rotary is to ask you to help us with early childhood education, because it matters greatly. Stephanie and I talk about it. Minnie and I talk about it. Courtney certainly is handling that. But I want, and Blythe, and all that you do at Shelter in Arms. So that's the charge. The charge is, we set out a goal. This is the first time the city of Atlanta is making an investment into early childhood education. And our partner, APS, is making the same investment. $5 million from the city, $5 million from APS, $5 million has come in from Whitehead. And so now we're looking for the last $5 million to start this movement towards early childhood education. So all the things that we start seeing and some of these social ills and issues that happen, a lot of it has to do with ill preparedness and underpreparedness of our children. And so I'm asking you to partner with us in that, and Gears and of course the rest will be here to help you. And Stephanie, did I leave anything out that I need to say from there on? You don't think so? All right. That's it, guys. That's our charge. I hope that we can get there together.
Are we in? Are we going to help? We're going to do something? All right.
Let's do something. Let's do something. Thank you.
Before we go to Q&A, Stephanie, it seems like as good a time as any. We've got some folks in the room who are working hard every day on behalf of our youngest people. From Gears and the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy and their Cox campus. If y'all could just stand up and have a round of applause for you all. Thank you for being here.
So we are going to go to some Q&A, but before we do, it's so funny because Tommy shared with me his backpack or piece of luggage analogy, and I actually brought a piece of luggage for him because I'm a big believer in visual learning. So I want you all to remember Tommy's luggage analogy, right? When you go on the trip and you're packing everything in for that life journey, you got your book, you got your toothbrush, you got a hat, you've got all the things you need, and then there comes a time when you do have to close it up, right? You can't put any more in there. Fortunately, the brain's not exactly like that. We do we can keep learning as we age, but it gets a whole heck of a lot harder. And the basic wiring, Tommy's a builder. He does construction all the time, and he will tell you what they spend some of the most time doing is laying the foundation, getting the foundation planning right before they even start the structure. That's what early childhood education is about, is getting the foundation right so that everything else that we need to do can be built on top of that. So with that, I want to kick off a question for Courtney. I was involved, I was witness, let me clear that up, to a car accident. And the officer who was there on the scene, Officer Ford, I asked him where he lived, if he had kids, he does. And he said he couldn't afford to live in the city because of child care issues. And this is an essential service provider. How often are you hearing about those kind of issues from city employees?
Yeah, all the time. It's a massive issue. It is probably one of the biggest issues that affects our attrition rate. And so the city is severely understaffed now. I'm sure many of you are going through that. So it's no different than the private sector, except y'all pay a little bit more. And so when you compound a global pandemic, when you compound, just a government salary, when you compound our existing affordable housing challenges, which we've talked about, you run into the perfect storm, if you will, and it makes it really, really hard to attract and retain employees. A safer street, if you want a safer street, that means it's better off to have that police officer living on that street. You're better off to have that teacher working in your neighborhood. You're better off to have all of these individuals who work to keep this city going in the actual neighborhood in which they serve. And so it's incredibly difficult to do that in the city of Atlanta now. We lose people year over year because of it.
So do we have questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Oh, Lauren.
So I'll just talk loudly. So, Mike, I'm going to tee one up for you because this is something the audience needs to hear about. So we're talking a lot about the need for literacy and that quality early education. But one of the things I know you're seeing is the fact that there has been so much trauma through the pandemic and the way that kids in early learning centers are showing up, and this whole kind of focus on trauma-informed care and social emotional learning. And we know kids can't learn what they need to learn if they're in chaos. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what's happening across early learning centers to help combat that?
Yes, thanks, Lauren. And Lauren is my partner in this early learning work with all the great programs that the Y has. And so we do talk a lot about just the need to invest in resources to support our children in their mental and emotional well-being and their families, because we are seeing, and we were talking about this at our table earlier, we will see a lot of the effects of the pandemic in a few years on how our children are showing up, how they're learning, how they're communicating, and it's something that we have to pay attention to. So it is important that as we're thinking about investments in early learning, we are also thinking about the whole child and the well-being of the whole child. And that includes that social, emotional, and mental supports that we're all looking at as quality programs in the city of Atlanta.
Is there another question from anyone? Yes. Joe.
Courtney, I got involved and served on the national board of CASA GAL, the Court-Appointed Special Advocates for Children. I'm particularly interested in the group of kids that are put into state supervision under the foster care program, and a lot of them come in at 3 months as well as at 13. I'm interested in knowing what support is being given to this special population that often is moved from place to place during a period of time.
I'm gonna look at Blythe. I don't know. I mean, so here's what I'll say. Not enough. I mean, there's not enough for parents with, who just normal parents who work every single day. There's not enough childcare options for them, right? And so when you compound that with the issues that foster care provides, that's a broken system in and of itself. If you work for the state, I'm sorry, I love you, and we can talk about that afterwards. But there's a lot of support that system needs in and of itself to be prepared to really even begin to do the kind of work that Comer Yates would tell you need to do to be able to prepare a child for development. That's not enough. We need to do way more. We are, rooms like this can have tremendous influence on all levels of government. It's mostly, in large part, it's a funding gap. There's a policy gap, but stability is incredibly important, right? And so if you're moving all the time, whether you're 3 years old or you're 13, you're going to have a hard time making friends, building social networks, and getting access to the kinds of relationships that allow you to develop into a whole adult, or a whole kid, then a whole adult. And so that's not a good situation. We need to do a deeper dive on that. And yeah, it's a problem.
And there are some supports that we work with families and caregivers who are supporting young children who are in foster care system, and there's funding available through state dollars, our CAPS program, and then other funding that we look to have through some federal funds. But
Blythe, can you tell them what CAPS is?
I knew you were going to ask me for the acronym. Child and Parent Support. We use so many acronyms in early learning. We even forget services. And so there is funding available for children who are living in that situation. But what is important is, to Courtney's point, is how we can better align our systems so that there isn't a gap for that child, regardless of where he or she may be at any time. So I think alignment and collaboration, which is key for all of these systems.
Got a question over here.
In the upper grades, you deal with transportation with buses. How do you address the transportation issue for children the age that we're talking about, and how much of a problem is that?
Transportation is a barrier for many families, especially the families that we are talking about and many of our organizations have in our mission to serve. And we do provide transportation when it works. So there are buses for children that are very, very small. And we also work with our families as we heard today, how much childcare costs, how much housing costs, and then all of the other things. We do work with our families to provide transportation options and support as well, because that's an expense. That's part of life, our life expenses that families just, another barrier that we believe we need to remove so that our families can access our care.
I want to bring it back for a second to working families and our newest member, Michael. I wonder if you'd be willing to share like your kid's journey and your wife's with Chick-fil-A. Can we get a mic to Michael?
I can also speak loud. I just told my table earlier that I was lucky enough for my wife to be at Chick-fil-A, and our three boys in their preschool years until they went to kindergarten were able to have a phenomenal facility that Chick-fil-A has on their campus. If you haven't been there, I'm sure a lot of the educators in the room have been there. It's tremendous from not only just the education standpoint, but socialization, being around other kids their age. So, we lucked into it, Stephanie.
And I'm guessing it kept your wife at Chick-fil-A too.
It certainly did.
That retention
and
issue.
she's still there, so. Exactly. Oh, and that's a good point. I didn't mention that. It's $25 a week per child. So, and that's,
So
both great.
compare that to many families that are paying really college tuition costs for childcare. So I know Bill Bowling had a question, and then we have a question over here. Oh, and Billy Levine.
I'm Billy Levine. I was the chair of the Atlanta Speech School Board a number of years back. And Comer Yates likes to say, we've got the answer right in front of us. And the speech school itself is looking far and wide, projecting the Cox campus far and wide with the help of the Cox Foundation. Is there an organization or a city that we look at and say, we should be more like them? Or is there an organization or a city that we look at and say, hey, we don't want to do it that way? And how would we measure ourselves in those metrics?
Courtney?
Yeah, so I don't know that, look, I can tell you that Atlanta has the bones to get this work right. I'm a fervent believer that there's nothing wrong with this city that can't be solved by what's right with this city. Blythe is what's right with this city. Mindy Benderman is what's right with this city. Our friends at the YMCA is what's right with this city. Our friends at Cox and the Speech School are what's right with this city. Talk to Me Baby is probably a world-class program where every single nurse at Grady Hospital is trained with the skills needed to learn how to communicate with their kids literally at age 0, right? So at the moment of birth, right, they are modeling for parents. They are communicating with a child in a way that fosters and encourages brain development in really, really powerful ways. And so I think all we need to do is scale and invest in the folks we have in this room. Follow the mayor's leadership. Do whatever Stephanie Blank tells us to do. Tommy's going to pass around the plate, and I think we'll be in a phenomenal place.
Bill Bowling.
Thank you. I really appreciate this as our subject today. I think when you're asking this room to be investors, and that's really what this is about, I think it's important, and I found it important in raising money for issues I've worked with, is to look at the value proposition. You know, what's it cost not to make this investment? And what does it cost, and how does it affect other things? You know, certainly we've worked a lot on affordable housing, and Margie Stagmeyer's proven the point that affordable housing and education go hand in hand, and we know it affects public health. But I don't know if Gears or Comer or somebody has that number, that return on investment, because you're asking us to invest, and we could invest in many places.
6 to 1. So.
All right,
Yes.
say more.
Yeah, so there's a 6 to 1 return on investment in early education that spans across whether it's economic development, public safety. I'll just double click on public safety, right? So when we prepare kids for education, it costs, I'll just say it like this, it costs APS anywhere around $13,000 a year to educate a kid. when we don't educate that kid and provide them with high quality options, they fall into some other activities that lead them into the criminal justice system. It costs the state of Georgia $22,000 a year to house a prisoner. So $13,000 to educate a child, $22,000 to house a prisoner. Make an economic decision, right? Make a smart business decision on the front end. And so I can double click down on each one of those standards: employee retention, affordable housing, you name it. You're going to come across the need to invest in our young people early, often, and in a significant way. And so, thank you for teeing a part of that up.
Gears published an awesome report called Opportunities Lost. It talks about the economic loss to the state. And what's the total number pre-pandemic?
Pre-pandemic, it was $2.75 billion.
$2.75 billion annual due to early childhood issues. So it's a huge economic driver for the state as well. So we can, 1.75. It's still $1 billion. It's still a lot.
Per year.
So we got time for one last question over here.
Thank you all for coming. My question's going to follow on the deal of bills. Can you talk about innovative financing mechanisms, things like pay for success programs, social impact bonds, as a way to scale financing for these kinds of programs?
Millage rates.
So I'll just say that, there's need to explore, and social impact bonds is one, for sure. The city of Atlanta is in the strongest economic position that it's been in quite a long time. And so we're exploring a number of activities to be able to fund not just this initial investment, but ultimately get to universal childhood education, from a special services district, from right sizing our commercial real estate assessments. I don't want to scare any big developers in the room, but we might be coming to talk to you. I see Dallas is in the room and a few other folks, but we might be having that conversation with you about how to really, we'll be demonstrating to you that by paying a little bit more, you'll have exponential impact on all the things you care about, right, through an investment in early childhood education. So there are a number of activities that the mayor is exploring, and we'll be prepared to announce those at the next State of the City. Stay tuned.
Blythe?
Yeah, and I also just think, thinking about being creative in the way that we use the space that we have in our city, co-locations and shared property and shared opportunities to provide high quality early learning spaces for employees from the city and employees from your companies that really need access to services. So I think that's a way that we need to think more creatively in the way that we are structured and providing early learning services.
We also, go ahead, Courtney.
I was just going to say, to that point, the mayor will be making an announcement towards the end of the year around how we plan to deploy city-owned land and/or space for early education, and that'll sound something like we're just going to give it to people for free. So
one of the things that we are also working on with the Metro Chamber, and I'm sorry Katie's not here today, is a business toolkit, and we've also been reaching out to HR folks at employers, whether it's a small employer, middle-sized, or large, to assess what your employees are saying you need. Because one of the things that we know happens is oftentimes employees don't always feel comfortable telling their big bosses what they really do need. I know that there's a certain CEO in the room that I had a little disagreement about one time with that very same issue. And your employees need it. And I think one of the things that the pandemic and the subsequent Great Resignation has laid bare is business can no longer afford to ignore the issue. And business needs to be at the table as a part of the solution, just as a part of doing good business and being a good employer. So when we get this report done through the Metro Chamber, we can also share that out as well. But lots of exciting things going on. We've been looking at this for a long time about other cities, and truthfully, we haven't seen another city that's doing what we're about to do in the city of Atlanta. And I want, our city to shine. I know Courtney feels the same way. The mayor certainly does. We have a unique opportunity in front of us, and it's the time, we think, to capitalize on all of this. And I want to thank Dr. Herring, too, for making the commitment. She's in the house as well through APS. So Thank you so much for your questions and your thoughtfulness, and there will be more learning opportunities around this issue as we go into October as well. But I want to thank Randall, first of all, for moderating, and Blythe and Courtney for taking the time out of their busy days to be here with us. We'll see you guys next week.